I'm 2018 USA National Finalist Rachel Fatherly. You're watching Garage Strength TV. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and ring the notification bell.
Throw that ass in a circle, circle. Throw that ass in a circle, circle. Throw that ass in a circle, circle. Throw that ass in a circle.
Welcome to another episode of The Throw Show.
So what are we covering today?
So I think it's been fitting for me. I've always wanted to do a podcast. Obviously, I wanted to do a podcast with Dr. B. And so my goal is that this would be an intro to me training with Anatoly Bondarchuk, who is arguably one of the most successful throws coaches of all time. He's got his PhD in pedagogical science, which is teaching. I think it's the teaching science field, the science of teaching or something like that. But he was an Olympic champ in 1972, Olympic bronze medalist in 1976. He coached Yuri Sadiq, Sergei Litvinov, Dylan Armstrong, Justin Rhodey, Sultana Frizzle, who's a Canadian hammer thrower, and then a whole bunch of is it Abdulayev? I think no, Abdulayev is the Russian wrestler. Guy who won the '92 Olympics. He coached him. Abdulayev. I think he was from Turkmenistan. Nikulin. I think he's had 18 Olympic medalists, multiple world record, like 100 world records have been broken under him. Just absurd accolades. So he was sort of the head of the Soviet Union specifically for hammer throwing. He worked a little bit with some discus throwers and some shot putters, and all the way to he was in the beginning camps with Alexander Karelin, who was a Greco-Roman wrestler, so he did know him. And he would even tell me stories of who's the super heavyweight, the Soviet super heavyweight, who's a weightlifter, like the iconic big fat super heavyweight. And he would tell stories like he would be training with him, and he said he would always just have, containers and containers of strawberries. Like the guy would have eat strawberries by the pound. The secret sauce. Yes, it's strawberries. The secret sauce he would always say was caviar, and probably sauce. But I actually, talking with him about stuff like that, he would be pretty open about it. So I've always wanted to have him on the podcast because he was sort of a mentor to me. I mean, he was a mentor to me. He is somebody that I looked at to go train with Dr. B as getting my master's degree. And he was, he let me spend hours and hours just sort of picking his brain. And so I thought, it'd be cool to just go over what I learned from him and the time I spent there. And I didn't end up being what I wanted to be or who I thought I could be, but I learned a lot from that time. And I just thought it'd be cool to share how I've used it effectively since being there in Canada. So
yeah, I think this is a great topic because I feel like a lot of people talk about. I mean, obviously Bondarchuk is very well known, and a lot of people talk about his systems and just hearing what your personal experience I think is just beneficial for everyone to kind of just get a firsthand account of what the training was like. But so what, I guess starting kind of from the beginning, what led you out there in the beginning? And you can kind of tell your story about how you ended up. Maybe not the whole story, but sum it up as short as you can. 2 minutes. I'll set it.
Oh,
Jason set a 2-minute clock.
Okay, so I was a drunk in college, and I wasted a whole bunch of time. I thought I should have been an NCAA All-American, and I was not. I qualified for NCAAs as a sophomore. After my sophomore year, I thought I was a cat's meow and turned into a drunk, and I just never really panned out to be anything. And I wanted to either take one of two paths. It was either going to be go to get my PhD in religious studies or go to get my master's from someone of the caliber of Dr. B, Anatoly Bondarchuk. And so what ends up happening is my senior year, the ring was still around on the internet, and Martin Bingisser had posted Dylan Armstrong was looking for training partners for 2008 Olympics. So this was 2007. And Dylan at the time was like a 2070 guy or 2050, somewhere around there. And I was like, Dr. Bize is coach. I knew who Dr. B was just from the ring and from sort of perusing around the internet. And he had just started to Can Throws, I think, was still up online at that time. Can Throws, Canadian Throws. And they would have some of the stuff from Dr. B. So he had been in Saudi Arabia, then in Portugal, I believe it was. Or no, it was Kuwait, and then Portugal, and then Judy Armstrong, Dylan's mom, ended up sort of coercing him to come to Canada. And so I sort of looked at it and I was like, all right, I was going to get a master's from Temple and then head on the path of going to get my PhD in religious studies, or Jason, you're getting a phone call, or I was going to take that time and say, you know what, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to go down the path of becoming sort of like a sports scientist and learn from Dr. B and figure out what Dr. B's system was. And so I planned everything out. I worked that entire summer. I saved every dime I could. I worked a lot, and Dr. B and Dylan would send me stuff to do that summer before I went up to Kamloops, British Columbia. And I didn't even take care of I crossed the border and they're like, what are you doing up here? And Chris was with me. So Chris hitchhiked back after we went to Kamloops. So we drove across Canada with Anton, my dog, who just passed away. And we go to cross the border just north of Glacier National Park in Montana. And they're like, what are you doing? And I should have just said, we're just visiting. But I said, I'm moving to Kamloops. They're like, do you have your papers? I was like, what papers? So long story short, Judy ends up getting me across. I moved to Canada, figure everything out. I get a job. I'm working crazy hours. And my first day with Dr. B, I just, I went into training and I was like, you know what? I want to be blown away. I want to come out of this training session like I have no idea what to expect. I had no idea. And 2 hours later, I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And then I went back in the afternoon because we train twice a day, and I realized we're doing the exact same workout again to a T. Everything identical to the morning workout. I'm like, well, that's weird. And then the next day when I woke up, I was so sore. I was sore. I remember being sore like inside of my rib cage and being like, oh my gosh, like what, this is crazy. And, essentially that was the rest of my time there. That was the year the Phillies had been to the World Series. That they were in the World Series when I was there. Actually, they didn't win that year. They won the next year, but that's just an offshoot of the story. So it was sort of just, I had no idea what to expect, and that was sort of when I got introduced to what you would call the complex method, or Jason, your battery's low. The complex method, as it's sort of marketing is called with Dr. B, and what his training system is. So that's sort of the long and short of it, I guess, is what I'd say, as far as me being introduced to the whole system. Yeah. So you mentioned Dylan Armstrong was pretty much the main reason why you went out there to be his training partner, but who else was there? Who's training? And tell us a little bit about maybe just the people there and the success or how they performed through the training program, and then maybe we can get into the actual training. Yeah, I think the way I looked at it was almost like, so in fighting, in boxing or in MMA, they call it 8 weeks out. When you're 8 weeks out, that's camp. It's like you got 8 weeks to prep for a fight, and you're not doing anything except for fight preparation. You're obviously preparing before those 8 weeks, but that last 8 weeks is like hardcore for fighting. And that's the way I looked at it for going to train with Dylan. It was like, this is our version of 8 weeks out. So we moved there in September. I moved there in September, and then Beijing was, early August. So I sort of treated it like we're a year out. This is a year of training leading into his preparation. And so everything was geared around pushing Dylan pretty much. Now, the biggest thing to go along with that is that Dylan at the time, he's 26, 27 years old, and he's just the biggest goofball on the planet. Like, really just, like, embodies that high school goofball, but, like, a really good dude. Like, and he's just always one of those guys like, yo, oh, my God, what's up, Dane? Like, he's always got, like, this larger-than-life personality. My first time I ever met Dylan, he pulled down, and he had this Silverado, big Chevy truck, pulls down, drives into the sector, and it was like a gravel sand sector, and he just starts doing donuts in the middle. I'm looking at this guy like, dude, I just moved here. I've never met him. And he gets out. He's like, what's up, man? How's it going? And Dr. B's just like shaking his head like, dude, what's going on? So Dylan was the larger-than-life personality, and he was, the main guy there, obviously. That's who we were there for. And then it was Jesse Roberts, who Dylan had used to compete against a little bit. And he's a left-handed thrower who was Brian Clay's roommate in college. Brian Clay was Olympic champion in 08, actually won the decathlon, or 04, I think. 08, 04 Chevrolet won the decathlon. And so Jesse had, he's a 20-meter guy, and then Justin Rohde moved up in January of that year. So that was like the main group of shot putters. There was a decathlete that trained with us here and there. Gary Reed would come in and out, who's an 800 runner, but then we'd have like Jen Joyce, Sultana Frizzle, this dude Rob Nagrin, who's a beast hammer thrower that never panned out, but he was a big power lifter. Ford Widrig, who's one of my closest friends to this day that I talk to quite a bit. Michael Letterlow, who's there, who's also another guy that was the K-Manian hammer throw record holder. So there was a lot of really Vanessa was there. I'm trying to think of Vanessa's last name now, but she was there too. She's another hammer thrower from Azusa Pacific. So it was a big group of really, really talented people. And Megan Rohde was there, Megan Vandervliet. She was also there, and that's sort of like, she sort of brought Justin in. They ended up getting married and since have separated. But, just a great group of like really, really like-minded people. So it was awesome, dude. It was just, really good experience, really good people.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And that sort of just fed the whole culture. Everybody was there to learn and to feed off of Dr. B. And that's, Dr. B's another larger-than-life oddball.
Yeah.
So.
So why don't you run us through like a session, like take us like beginning to end. You pull up to training.
Okay.
What happens? What is Dr. B like during the training, and what are you doing in that
Dr.
session?
B always would laugh because Anton would be sitting in the back of my Dodge Neon. I had the blue Dodge Neon, and Anton would sit in the back, and he would sit up on the ledge and like look out over the ledge to watch where we were sitting, because I would back into the parking space that would overlook.
Okay.
And Dr. B every session, doggy, Anton, like say stuff like that, because he has broken English, but he'd always think it would be hilarious. But it would, you'd walk in, you walk down, and this is when we would be outdoors, and it was just, get in, and every session Dylan had a full block of chalk. So every single session he would use an entire block of chalk. He never had a bag. He would break the chalk, and it would go everywhere, and he would throw as much chalk all over the place, and that was it. He wouldn't even consider trying to preserve chalk. But he would break it up right away, and it was literally, you get in a circle. You might walk around, might do some squats, some twists with the shot, but that's it. You literally just got right into the circle.
Like got out of the car and got into the circle.
You do like 10 squats, and you just go in, and Dr. B would say you take 3 stands. So we take 3 standing throws, and you'd hit 3 stands, and you might throw, 12 at the time. I might throw like 14 to 15 meters, and then you'd go right into your full throws, and you'd take about 5 to 8 full throws at like 50 to 60%. And then you just start getting after it a little bit more, and then he would just sort of give you these one-word cues, and he would sit like this, and he'd have a white hat on usually. Sometimes in the summertime he'd have like a Greg Norman type hat, which would be like a wicker basket looking hat. And in the wintertime he'd always have this Ukraine jacket on, and he'd just sit there no, you up, and he'd just yell things like that. You up, Dane, you up, no, you're up, or he'd say no good. That was it. That was like all you got. And then when he would get excited, one time I couldn't figure out how to get over my left, and he got really, really pissed. Like he would get mad, like aggressively mad, and he would stand. He stood in a circle, and he's had me stand to his left, and he goes, boom, and like hammers me. He's like, this what you need. Now you do to me. And you know, he's like 70 years old at the time, and I just like destroyed him. But that's how he taught. Like, there was no, oh, hey, you know, is it okay if I'm a little aggressive with you? It was like, no, you suck, or you're good, or he's yelling at you. That was it. Yeah. There was no discussion. There was no like, hey, Dr. B, I think this. He'd be like, I don't care what you think. Like, shut up and throw. And that would be like the throw session, and it would be 12 to 15 throws with one implement, 10 to 12 throws with another if you were throwing multiple implements. And you'd get right up to the weight room, and you'd go lift, and your lift would be 45 minutes to an hour. And while we would be lifting, the hammer throwers would start to come in if we were indoors. And that's where I spent a lot of time. Would be like, I'd get done a lift, especially in the afternoon. I would get done a lift in the afternoon, and I would go downstairs and watch him coach, you know, Sultana, Vanessa, Jen, Mike, and Megan, and all of them, Ford, or not Ford, Rob, and I would try and really just see. I watched a lot of hammer throw that year, and to hear his cues and what he would focus on, and I would ask him so many questions that he would give me these like periodization lessons like on the whiteboard, because there was a whiteboard right behind where he'd sit down in the cage, and he would write like, this is Matviev, this is Medvedev, this is Verkhoshansky, this is Bondarchuk, and he would lay out stuff on the whiteboard and what they all believed, and he would always go back to these three. They wear white coats. They always have white coats on. Bondarchuk, he sits here, and it was just, dude, it was stuff that people would kill for this experience. Like it was so good, and being able to train with Dylan, and Jesse was like my older brother, essentially, just like the guy who was always like my mentor, and then Dylan was sort of like, Dane, I want to go do something dumb. Will you come with me? And I would always just tag along. So, and Dylan is the only one that really had money because he was sponsored by Nike and funded well by Athletics Canada. So he was always taking us to, you know, the Chinese buffet, the Indian buffet. We're going to Starbucks. He's buying lunch every day, every single day. So that was literally the way it was laid out, though. And then sometimes if you would have, and then after you would do your lift, you would do special strength stuff. So you'd throw a cinder block, you'd throw a dumbbell, you'd throw a shot for height, you'd throw a discus into a wall, you'd throw a swinging barbell, you'd throw barbells, you'd throw medicine balls, stuff like that. And then if you had an ache or a pain, Dr. B would do like this voodoo thing where he'd rub his butt on your back or something. And that was every single day, over and over and over and over again. We would take 300 to 400 throws a week.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's even higher with the special strength factored in. So, you know, it was just, it was, and then that would change, your program would change. Sometimes you do one, like a day one, day two, back and forth. But most programs, you do the exact same thing every single day, every single session for, you know, 3 to 6 weeks, something like that. And I think that's where a lot of people get lost when they start to talk about Dr. B and Bondarchuk and the complex method. They don't know what it is. They'll say they do a Bondarchuk method, but it's just because they're like throwing discs into a wall or doing side med ball throws. They're not doing a Bondarchuk method. Yeah. Like, I would say we're influenced by Bondarchuk, but we're not doing a complex Bondarchuk method type training.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to? Well, yeah. I mean, what, like, I don't know. Do you see that often with like people? Like, how do you? Obviously, Bondarchuk is, you know, has largely influenced the throwing community. But
right.
What do you see as? I guess before we get into your like biggest takeaways, what do you see the impact of Bondarchuk on throwing? Just kind of zoomed out right now, I guess. And what's your take on it?
I think what's cool for me is that a lot of what Dr. B did, and it was more about his process behind everything. And I think that like what he did to us was ingrained, just like getting reps in. There's no magic secret. He was open about everything. He was an open book. I would ask him about the years when, you know, Sadiq was on steroids. I would ask him about the years when he was clean, and he would show in his book the years he threw 80 to 81, he's clean. The years he's thrown 85, 86, he's not. He would always say, "Oh, no, he eat. No, he eat. These years he eat. Look, Dane, he eat. Look." And he would like get mad at me. Like, I get it, dude. You don't have to yell at me. But he was always an open book. And I think that that's one thing that sort of has that at least I feel like he's put onto the whole throwing world, is that there's no hidden secret. It's you've got to throw a lot. You've got to be strong, and you've got to have some technical model. And I think indirectly his technical model now is what's impacted people the most. Like, he wasn't the best at getting his model across, but you know, using Justin and using Dylan as like the translators of the goal, like they've done the best. They did the best job of sort of translating that model. And I think that that's what you see now. And then Tim Nedow, because he did spend quite a bit of time with Justin and with Dr. B and with Dylan. And I think that that's where you see he's done a really, you know, he's just done an incredible job with that, is like what his model is, what his work, it all comes back to that work ethic. And it's like, that's the thing. Dr. B would show up at training all the time, shot, hammer guys, he'd go home, take a nap. Galena, his wife, would make him lunch, and they'd do it again. Shot, hammer, go home, Galena make dinner, and then they go to bed, and they do the exact same thing every day. And that's that consistency that you need to be an elite thrower too, I believe.
Yeah. So what would you say is the number one thing you took away
from Dr. B? I think there's more than a number one, but I think for me it's being open with your athletes. But I think ultimately it would come back to learning from your athletes and learning that feedback that your athletes are providing and listening to them. And it doesn't mean that you have to listen to them, actually listening to them, but listening to their body, listening to or seeing how they're moving in the circle, seeing how they're lifting, and seeing how they're feeling, and just discussing the big picture thing. And that's the thing with Dr. B too. You know, you could sit there. I've got napkins where he would just draw things like this, and that would be an exercise.
Just a stick figure.
Yeah. So like we get so hung up in, you know, Dylan got third at the Olympics. He's a world silver medalist, and he would make programs and he would put, you know, 2 by 5, and that would be me doing a snatch, and then he might put arrows like this, and so that would be me snatching 2 by 5. Okay. And this would be a program he'd have on a napkin, and he'd be like, "Here, take this. This is your program."
Hieroglyphics.
Yeah. And you would take it for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and you'd have to make sure you don't lose a napkin. And that's the thing too. It's like that's what I think he instilled in me, is that you don't need anything fancy. You don't need anything, like everything we have in this gym we don't need. We need like 4 things. We need bumper plates, we need a platform, we need a circle, we need shots. That's it. You know, if we have, and a bench press, that's it. You don't need anything else. And he's an Olympic champ. He's trained, you know, Olympic medalist. That's all he ever wanted. And I think that's that simplicity of his program. And I get caught in the weeds with this a lot, where it's like you want to make it so complex. And you know, I have this morning a discussion with my weightlifters where they're like, "Well, 3 out of my 6 days are the same as his." Well, yeah, you guys are doing 2 lifts and you're peaking in 4 weeks. Like, what do you want me to do? You're doing a snatch and a clean and jerk. Of course you're doing the same exact workout. But the thing is, too, is that Dr. B might have us do a similar workout so that then he could sit there. And one time he brought in a book of charts. And he was like, "Look," and shows us like all of my charts over the last 6 months. And it was like, this is Dane, this is Jesse. He's number 2, I was number 3. And Dylan was number 1, but athlete type. Dylan, he said he was always torn between number 1 and number 3. And he would say, you know, there's 3 athletes, maybe 4. This is their reaction to your stimulus and this is how you learn from them. And that was where I was most fortunate with him, is that he would let me come in and learn from him at his house and interview him. And that's where I think that's the biggest lesson that I got out of him, was you've got to learn from your athletes. You've got to see what they're doing and see how they're reacting to that stimulus that you're providing. See how long it takes. See how they're handling it mentally, physically, whatever it might be, technique-wise, and then prepare that next program for that. And I think that's the biggest thing that I think, for me, that was the biggest thing, is just being progressive and learning constantly trying to learn and constantly trying to figure out, like, is it the body doing this, or is this their mind doing this adaptation? Is this their mind preventing something from occurring? And I think that it comes back to, with Dr. B, I always just think it's inconsistency. I think his technical model now, you see it in Krauser, and I don't even know if Krauser's influenced by Bondarchuk at all, but Krauser throws the way Dr. B would have coached or coaches, and similar to, Justin, I think, is the one who really sort of brought this to the limelight of, this is arguably the best way to move. And discus throwers like Harding, moving that way is very, very similar to what Dr. B taught. But I think it's always goes back to learning, being progressive, and being consistent. Because if you have consistent technique, you have more confidence going into a meet, and you can then peak better. So I think that's ultimately the biggest takeaways that I had, was just learning everything, and always learning. Yeah.
So now you don't do your training and rate your programs how Bondarchuk does. So what things, I guess,
actually, let me go back and say that before you ask this. Yeah. Outside of learning the progress and making consistent progress mentally as a coach, having strength that is applied directly to your sport is the most important training aspect. So taking the quality of the sport and targeting the quality that you need to improve that sport in the weight room, that's the second most important thing. And so that special strength, throwing dumbbells, throwing rocks, banded stands that we do, stuff like that, that would be like the second most important thing. So I just wanted to say that before you ask the pointed question. Yeah.
So basically, you don't do your training. You don't set up your training like Bondarchuk. I guess basically, why not? And what aspects of Bondarchuk's training do you not really prefer?
I think, dude, that's a really tough question. I think, like, Dr. B influenced me more than anybody else. And so for me, for you to say I don't do it, I'd say you're wrong, because we throw 10 sessions a week with, 30 throws a session. That's the most important part.
I mean, I guess the aspect is the same exact workout every single day. I guess that would be the main difference.
So and you a little bit, we might have done that. We did a lot of like dumbbell throws or rock throws when you were coming up. And I think the things that people have to remember, and I would argue that this is actually why our gym is successful, and a lot of these other guys that have worked with him haven't developed anybody, is that you can't bring in a normal high school kid whose parents, bringing in, and Dr. B has workouts that are different. Like when Justin came, he would do 3 or 4 different workouts in a week, but they weren't the best workouts. They weren't great. I don't think he was that good at writing those style of training programs, because that's not what he was really good at. He was really good at getting those elite guys better. And I think that from my perspective, if I'm training a wrestler, a parent is not going to bring in a wrestler to me and say, Dane, I want you to train this wrestler, and then they pay me, and then I have them do the exact same workout 4 weeks in a row, so they do it 20 times. I'd go bankrupt. I wouldn't have money. And I think that for me, that's where I have to look at it from a business perspective, but also from a physical perspective, because I believe that you can adapt to multiple different workouts just fine. and you can still track how they're progressing physically. And I think that that's the biggest thing for me, was that I wasn't just training throwers. I was training wrestlers. I was training football players, swimmers, soccer players, throwers, whoever else was coming in to train with me to pay me. And when I first really started to develop my system. And so at the time, I tried to do it a little bit with the throwers, and it just got to the point where I'm like, this isn't working. It's not enjoyable for the high school kids to do this. Yeah. And they're not mature enough to comprehend it. And I'm not mature enough as a coach. I wasn't good enough as a coach to really understand what's going on. I'd only been in his system for a year. Did I spend a lot of time with him and ask him a lot of questions? Absolutely. But I didn't have that global perspective at the time. And I think that that's where, for me, it was more, it just wasn't in my mindset. It wasn't even in my mold. And even when I came back and started to throw again, when I PR'd, I was on my own system. I went back after I PR'd and I worked with Justin for about a year, and I did it again, but I didn't like it. I didn't like how I felt. I didn't like how inconsistent I was. Whereas on the system that I had, I felt good almost all the time. I felt like I could throw money, 90% of the time. So I think that, not that I was that good, but I think that for me, it just came back to what made sense financially for people to keep coming through the door. And it was more about learning from the athletes and then having that applied special strength that we would call it. And that was the most important aspect. And understanding that, there's a lot more factors to the money game in strength and conditioning. And there's a lot more factors to actual sports performance results. Because that's the other thing, is for me to get results, it wasn't working. I had to change that up. Yeah. So I think those are the biggest things on my end. And where I was most fortunate is that I had this time with Dr. B, and Adam Nelson paid me for 3 months to coach him, to write him programs, and I failed miserably. I sucked. He was like, I'm not working with you after 3 months. But one thing that Nelson did is that he sent me to Charles Poliquin. And when I went to Charles Poliquin, that's when I really started to sit there with Dr. B. Then I have Charles' influence here. And then it was sort of like, okay, now I'm going to start to piece everything together. Then by 2013, 2014, I get into Olympic weightlifting. And I go learn from guys at the OTC that have won the Olympics in Olympic weightlifting. And now all of a sudden I've got Bondarchuk, Poliquin, Olympic champs, Zygmunt Smalzers in the Olympic weightlifting realm, learning from Norik Vardanian and not directly from his dad, but his dad's Yuri Vardanian. So sort of learning from those different ones and molding it into my system that we have now. And that's where I think that's why Dr. B has created my system, because he taught me to do that. I would have been hesitant. I would have tried to do all these other different things, but what I did is I took all my experiences and formed them into what we have now. So
it's not like you're just trying to copy what someone else did. You took what you learned intuitively and pieced everything together to basically form your system for how it works for you and how it works for your business
athletes.
And for your athletes.
Right, yeah. I don't know if it works for our business, but I know it works for athletes. I know for athletes it works really well.
Right.
But I think what's gotten interesting is like Dr. B would say all the time, my system is good and there's other systems. He would always say that. That's his system. That works for him. And maybe it is better. But my system works for me and how I coach. And that's where my system's better than Dr. B's system. And people are going to say I'm nuts. But it's better than Dr. B's system because I've progressed off of that based off of what I have in this building and in my past 10 years of experience. So it's best for me and best for our athletes here because I'm in tune with the weightlifters so much because I see so many reps in the weight room and I see so many reps out in the circle. And now I can take that and be like, you know what? I peak weightlifters really, really well. I peak throwers really, really well. And now I'm combining this like perfect storm where it's like, I can take that Vardanian, Bondarchuk, Smalzerts, Poliquin influence, and then I use the experience of analyzing everybody all the time. Where are they having mobility issues? Where are they having stability problems? You know, the bar speed, just seeing the speed of the bar in the weight room versus in the circle, where that's at, and that really helps me stay in tune with the athletes. And that's, you know, we measure consistently, but we're not using it as much of a metric as Dr. B would have, because I have other metrics in the weight room that I'm basing everything off of. So it's just, it is different. I mean, I'm going to brag and say it's better, but at the end of the day, it's really just that it's different, you know, so. Yeah.
But it's worked.
Yeah, of course it's worked.
Look at all of our
throws in the leg. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're like, what else should I ask you, Dane? I think, dude, the biggest thing with Dr. B's stuff is just, I think one interesting point is like taking what he did and applying it to a sport like wrestling. And that's where it's like, okay, what does Nick do? Dude, he's always pulling on the collar tie, on a shot. He's always pummeling. And it's like, okay, so we do a lot of sled pulls, a lot of rope climbs, a lot of pull-ups, a lot of dumbbell benches alternating, a lot of explosive push-ups. And one thing that I'm always confused about, because like Dr. B was always big into the Olympic lifts, is that people will say they're on a Bondarchuk style method and then they're like not using Olympic lifts. Like, dude, we did a close grip snatch or a power clean or a snatch or a jerk every single day, twice a day. I don't know where these people are getting these ideas like, oh, I'm influenced by Bondarchuk and they're not doing the Olympic lifts. We did them every single day. Yeah. You know, so it's like I don't know. I don't comprehend where that sort of comes from, but I think if you took a step back and said, okay, that's wrestling. So Dane's taken that and applied it to wrestling, and I even use Olympic lifts like a high butt snatch or a high butt clean or a double bounce clean for wrestling, because Dr. B taught me to experiment and define those movements that are going to be similar to a wrestler, and that might be different movements that we would use for, you know, a discus thrower. So it's just, and this just goes back to not being stuck in one specific system ideology. You have your method, but your ideology can be a lot more dynamic and elastic, and it can bend based off of what that athlete is, you know, whereas, you know, some people be like, oh, nope, this is my system. I've got to do split squats with 800 pounds with a 75-second eccentric. And it's like, can you get away from that a little bit? I had to throw that one. I hope Sean's watching right now. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's cool, and what's cool with us is that with Dr. B's stuff, you know, he would always say this. Think about Dr. B was the umbrella. He had everybody in the Soviet Union sending them metrics, and that's where he got all of the data about what does your snatch need to be, what does your clean need to be, what is your front squat, back squat, what's your 30-meter sprint, all these things. What are those numbers? What's just like a benchmark for that stuff? And so he said, he's like, I'm up top. Everybody was underneath me. Everybody was telling me all these results. They were telling me all these numbers, and that was what was feeding my numbers. But then when I would get these athletes, I would get them when they were 72, 75 meter guys, and then they would become 80+ meter throwers. And so he would always say, you know, my system is predominantly that elite level guy. And I think what's cool with what we're doing is that we've done it with, you know, 6th graders who've become Morgan Shigo, who've become NCAA All-Americans. We've done it with Sam Mattis or Alex Rose, who was an All-American or an NCAA champion and have become Alex Rose, the Olympian. And so we've done it, you know, we've done it with Gwiz, who was an NCAA champ, and now he's a world bronze medalist. And I think that's what's cool with our story is it's like we've had it from literally from elementary, middle school level, the development of the system. And it's almost like we have those three layers of our system, whereas Dr. B's system was a lot more specific towards those elite athletes because that's just what he had. That was his experience. You know, that's where he was at with his training. So he didn't need to have that. And I think that's what makes us a little bit more, again, using the term dynamic, is that we've done the research ourselves and we've analyzed everybody and we see the body types and we see the movements and I do see, and this is what's sad is, and I know I've been bragging about this to you, is that just in the last 3-4 weeks, I feel like my programming has gone from a B- to a superstar, where it's like my program, it's like a light went off and I thought about Dr. B. I thought about Haley, versus Sam, and they're two different sports. One's a dude, one's a chick. One's big as hell, one's tiny, but they're similar athletes. They, Sam handles a lot of volume. Haley can handle a ton of volume. Now you take Noah, he can't handle a lot of volume. Now you take Jake, he can't handle a lot of volume. And now I started sitting there going like, why wasn't I thinking like Dr. B 5 years ago when I was laying out these programs? And that's where now it's like, holy crap, these guys are, now I'm starting to see a lot of okay, now when he going back to my journals that have athlete 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, I can sit in their room and go, Haley's like Dylan. Dude, Haley she's always getting better if the stimulus is there, and the stimulus has to be right. It's got to be volume. Whereas I was so hung up listening, and what's crazy is listening to somebody like Piros Dimas, who's he's a coworker of mine essentially, a guy I've spent weeks with talking to, a 3-time Olympic champ, and he's had an influence on my system. But one thing that he would always say: 10 weeks out or 10 days out, heaviest back squat; 7 days out, heaviest front squat; 5 days heaviest clean or last heavy clean jerk; 4 days last heavy snatch. And I took it as gospel, and now I'm going, no, that's not how it is. Haley's not going to peak that way. Haley's going to peak more aggressively. Jake can peak like Dimas. And I think that's where it's needed. It's like, everything Dr. B taught me is now coming back, and I'm sitting there pulling from what Norik would say, or pulling from what Dimas has said, and then listening to what Gwiz is saying and what Bill Zadek's telling Gwiz and Cale Sanderson, and sitting there going like, dude, these are the people who are influencing what we have. And that's something that I'm really proud about, proud of. Yeah. Because it's a really, really good, it's like every experience that our athletes have had in the past is contributing to make our system better day to day. And because we are open-minded coaches and DJ and everybody else that works with us, we're always trying to get better. I come to you or go to DJ like, dude, what do you think about this? I don't get it. And we're always trying to feed off of each other. And that's even still after Dimas, after Vardanian, and after Bondarchuk, and after Poliquin have already had that influence. So that's the whole thing. You've always got to get better. You've always got to learn from your athletes, essentially. Yeah. So, I don't know. Got to learn, Trevor. We got to learn from Udemy seminars for $11.99. Yeah. That's the only thing that's going to help our business. Right. You're asking these questions. I don't know. Maybe if we could get Gary Vaynerchuk in here, we'll actually learn something about business. Yeah, right.
We're going to stop learning about throwing and start learning about
Yeah, I think, what's your number one lesson? Well, my number one lesson is, if you want to make money, don't do some of the stuff Dr. B would do at practice where he'd just take a leak while you be sitting there. Yeah, right. Number 2, don't worry about throwing and weightlifting all the time. Try and learn how to run a business. Yeah. Caitlin always says, what are you watching? I'm watching throwing videos. Oh, like on YouTube? No, I'm like just sitting there watching Rachel throw back and forth, watching her throw. Last night I was watching Haley's lift her 97 double clean jerk. Dude, I probably watched it for like 30 straight minutes. And she's like, shouldn't you be watching something on like how to make us more money? I'm hoping that this will help us make more money. He's like, no, that's not going to make us more money.
But it'll make our athletes throw far, right?
Yeah, exactly. It will. It will. But still won't make us money. Damn it.
All right. So, Red Hot Minute.
Wait. I have a couple for you. Let me
well,
go.
Good, because I don't have any for you.
How about I'll go and you got to think of some. Or
right.
Jason should have to think of some while we do this.
Yeah.
Maybe, oh, look, I think there's a comment over there, Jason.
I looked at it. I don't think that's what it is.
Ah, jeez.
It's the same comment.
Jason's like, nobody watches our stuff. For some reason, we get these videos on on Instagram that have 10,000 views, and then we can't get somebody to watch this.
Not anymore.
Well, yeah. I think our Instagram's been doing pretty good lately, though.
Yeah.
Okay, so taking you back to throwing in the ice and the rain, I want to bring this back to original Dr. B stuff. Dumbbell throws in the rain or rock throws in the rain?
Am I throwing into a sand pit or a gravel pit?
Sand pit.
I mean, probably the dumbbell.
Okay.
Because the rock, like, it's just like bigger and it just gets the sand all over you.
Yeah,
more.
that's true.
And then you're just a sloppy, gritty mess. The
That's
dumbbell's
frozen.
a little bit cleaner.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
technique. And this is going to throws you. Reese Hoffa or Ryan Krauser?
That's tough. I have to go with Krauser.
Oh, okay.
Just because I think the reason I like Krauser better is because you're able to visualize it a little bit more because his obviously he's way taller, but it just like accentuates everything more. And I think when you watch it, you can get a better sense of because I always
Of
go
what
back
he's
to
doing. You can
that
see
the core fundamental movements are the same, and I think they're very largely the same. And you just did that analysis on YouTube, of Krauser versus Hoffa, and the fundamentals are the same, and especially with like your shoulders and your hips, and then the extremities are longer. So in Krauser, you see a wider sweep than Hoffa, and just visualizing that, I think you can get a better sense of the technique and the technical model with Krauser more than Hoffa.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I prefer Krauser.
That's a good reason. I don't. This is a little lame. Snatch or jerk?
Snatch.
Okay.
Just because I can never jerk.
Okay. You get to pick, and this goes back to your background of being an all-star distance runner. You're an Olympic champion. You have to pick the 800 meters or the steeplechase.
I mean, the steeplechase is cooler, but 800 is way shorter. So probably the 800.
Okay. Okay, throw them at me.
All right. I didn't think of anything. Let's go with favorite sweatshirt, the Garage Strength. I just go with what I see. That Garage Strength or this Garage Strength sweatshirt?
Dude, I really like that one, and I don't even know where mine is.
Really?
Yeah.
We should I think we should bring back like the simpler, like classic Garage Strength.
Joe said that to me. He said because you can see that from so far away.
Yeah.
It's such like a stamp.
Yeah.
It's a good stamp.
Let's go with. Wow, I wasn't gonna ask it. All right, let's just go with. I know the answer, but your favorite brewery.
Which are at Chatty Monks?
Yeah.
I thought. Well, I could say Trogs.
Do you have others? Oh,
I could say Trogs. Yeah.
I guess I guess brewery to go to.
Trogs.
Okay.
I like Trogs so much because it's dude, it has that church feel to it. And I know it sounds weird, but when you go to church, everybody's like on the same wavelength. Like everybody's like, it's peaceful, right? Like it's a nice time. That's why a lot of reasons why people like being there, because everybody's in a good mood. And it's the same thing when you go to Trogs. It's like everybody's lined up. It's this giant beer hall, and it's like, have you ever been to Trogs and everybody's like somebody's in a bad mood? Like there's no way. Like everybody's there like eating good food and drinking. I think it's at Trogs for sure.
Right.
Okay, so that's the story behind Bondarchuk. Thanks for tuning into this Throws show, and hopefully you can actually. Dr. B does have some really good books. The Throws book is really, really good. It's the blue one. I think this is probably his best book, The Throws. Simple, it's to the point. So check it out. Peace.